Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jeff, and I am a journalist and writer.
And I'm Rory Fraser, an architectural historian.
And together we are the hosts of the Country House podcast. We've got our producer somewhere in the audience as well, Ben, who's been with us since the start. And today we're, delighted to be here at Nevill Holt, a place we both know quite well. Rory lives in the area, and I've been a few times before. And we are doing a live podcast recording, our first one, on the story of the rise, fall and rebirth of the English country house through the lens of Nevill Holt Hall, which is, as you have seen, an extraordinary house that really sort of reads like a biography of English domestic architecture over the past sort of 800 years. We've been slightly panicked about 5 minutes before we started. David Ross, our lovely host, mentioned that there are two experts in the audience, including someone who's written a book on the history of Nevill Holt. So if you have any corrections, please wait till the Q&A and then shoot us down then if that's okay. But as we get started, we sort of split this into two parts. I'm going to do the sort of slightly later history. Rory, you've done quite a lot of reading on the early history. Why don't you kickstart us with telling us a little bit about the early history of the Nevill Holt estate, Nevill Holt Hall, starting in sort of 800 years ago.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Believe it or not, there is a history, there is a story of Nevill Holt before the Nevilles, and it's slightly shrouded in mystery. We understand that there was a small medieval manor here by about 1302, so presumably built at some point in the 1200s. Part of its original timber roof is still in the hall today, but we don't know an enormous amount about it. But the moment of, I suppose, apotheosis, the great excitement comes when the Palmer family arrive in the mid-1400s, and the Palmers add two of the features, really. I mean, they enlarged the house, but they add two of the features that it's most famous for today, I think, which are the porch and the big bay window. And this is in really, really beautiful late medieval style. So we're talking about lovely ogive windows, we're talking about finials, blind tracery. It's quite symmetrical, it's very intricate, it's got lovely, lovely carving.
So this is sort of the height of the perpendicular Gothic, so that sort of the last stage of Gothic in the late medieval period, which we normally associate with ecclesiastical architecture, so cathedrals and churches. And so, yeah, what are some?
Well, I mean, it's a bit like sort of. I mean, it's not as grand as the Great Hall at Eltham Palace, but it's part of a sort of similar moment, and it's a sign of, I suppose, architecture becoming more sophisticated. There's a greater emphasis on light. Still at this point, when we're talking about architectural history, there's a bleeding between ecclesiastical architecture and domestic architecture. They haven't quite worked out how to kind of differentiate between the two. And so there's also a church here, St Mary's, and there's more similarity, I suppose, between the house and church at that time.
And in this time, pre-Reformation, I suppose pre-Tudor, there was a huge overlap, wasn't there, between ecclesiastical architecture and domestic. I mean, a lot of abbeys and monasteries were homes for monks and their abbots, but also Oxbridge colleges, for example. We see this, like you said, this sort of bleeding between
the two,
domestic and ecclesiastical. And so the Palmers arrive in the sort of mid 15th century, and
they've got a lot of money as
yes,
well.
it's quite a wealthy area at the time, is it not?
It is a wealthy area. I mean, I think it's really, as we're sort of sitting in, beautiful, lovely central England, it's so easy to forget that this was the coast at the time, and that the great fens hadn't been drained, and so there's all the wool, all the wool from the sheep being sent off across the North Sea and coming back here, and the landowners here are minted, basically, and so all the churches around here, the medieval churches, are called world churches, and you look at somewhere like Stamford, I mean, you can barely throw a stone before crashing it through a kind of church window, and not that I'd advise anyone doing that, of course, but it's sort of quite impressive, and as a result, there's this sort of amazing plethora of architecture. I mean, the Brasenose College story. Let's
talk about that. So, Roy, you went to Oxford. You better at.
For my sins, I did go to Oxford, and I apologise if there are any cantabs here, but it's clearly a much more inferior university. But even though it's more nearby, but I mean, I love the sign of how rich Stamford was, the local market town, is that in the medieval period, you've got these. I think if we'd been monks in the medieval period, Jeff, we would have probably been banished from Oxford for misbehaving.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have been a monk because I'm a Puritan, but we'll get onto that
Yes,
later.
That's probably quite a good point anyway.
Anyway,
so these monks get banished, and they end up thinking where would be a nice place to set up a college, and they think Stamford would be a nice place to do it. So you have Brasenose College, Stamford,
which lasted for how long?
About 2.5 seconds.
And then the king put his foot down.
The king puts his foot down, the university puts its foot down, doesn't like this idea at all, and Stamford feels very upset. And so they sort of go back with their, Brasenose eventually returns back to Oxford. But it's just a sign.
And is there not still some sort of decree that no university may be founded in the town of Stamford or something?
I'm not sure about that.
There was some sort of law, I can't remember, but yeah, okay. So it's a very wealthy area. We've got wall towns like Stamford. The Palmers arrive, and they add this perpendicular Gothic. But the house is called Nevill Holt, so how does the Nevill family enter the scene?
So the Nevilles are very crafty. They enter diagonally. So the Palmers eventually run out of boys, and one of the Palmer daughters is married to a Nevill, and so he inherits Nevill Holt, and in the mid-1500s. So about the time that Elizabeth I is becoming queen, they find themselves queening over Nevill Holt, as it were. And I suppose the architectural shift, I mean, they, as far as I'm aware, they don't sort of initially change that much.
We're seeing a shift at this time in sort of the mid 16th century, where we're seeing a move away from, I suppose, fortified manor houses into more domestic and comfortable houses. So prior to the Wars of the Roses, Britain was still, there was a lot of internal turmoil. So a lot of country houses were also military strongholds. You had all sorts of fortifications, whereas we saw relative peace that I suppose internally has continued to the present day from the Tudors onwards. And so we saw the emergence of extraordinary country houses that weren't fortified at all. We think of the great prodigy houses of the Elizabethan era, places like Burghley House, not far away, near Stamford, Hatfield, Hardwicke Hall, amongst others.
And that's in parallel with this increasing vogue for classicism. So classicism has been sort of marching steadily across Europe, and finally it arrives in England about 200 years late.
And even later at Nevill Holt, because it seems the Nevilles were always a little bit behind the trend.
Nevilles, I have to say, get 20% extra time when it comes to architectural fashion, I think, in the architectural exam. But no, so there's this trend for classicism coming in, I mean, very gently, just in the detailing, and then you've obviously got a bit more peace, so less fortification, and then also lots of money, because people are beginning to confiscate the monasteries as well. Yeah. So you've got some houses, country houses, that are built next to abbeys and monasteries and so on, and they take down the stone and they use it to rebuild, and others that are actually just built on top of the ruins. So you've got houses like Fountains Abbey, or later Beaulieu Palace House, which are, you've got the ruined abbeys in the grounds, and then other houses, I suppose Laycock could be an example, where they sort of incorporate the ecclesiastical architecture into the country house. Into the country house. So I think it's an incredibly dynamic moment for sort of country house building. But the Nevilles, I think it's amusing. The Nevilles slightly kind of fall foul of this, well, certainly of the Reformation, because Thomas Nevill is a sort of shrewd guy, and he converts to Protestantism under Edward VI. So he sort of knows which side his bread's buttered on. But sounds like a few other grand families who flip-flopped a little bit between the Catholics and the... No, we love a recusant flip-flopper, which the Frasers are one of. Shame to say, although we all got massacred at Culloden, so I suppose we sort of got our just desert in the end. But anyway, so yes, but the Nevilles decide to convert back to Catholicism, and they become one of the sort of leading local families, recusant families. Now the recusants were just. To interrupt, the recusants were, well, there was quite a penalty, I suppose, for maintaining your Catholic faith in Protestant England, was there not? There was. So you had to pay what were called recusancy fines, which were absolutely extortionate. So, and it became a weird badge of honour if you were a recusant, because on the one hand you could afford to pay the fines, which was sort of quite glamorous, but on the other hand you were basically bankrupt the whole time. So it was a slightly strange deal. But the Nevilles were pretty, stout-hearted. I mean, they were pretty amazing. And what's even more amazing is that they were pretty actively involved with politics throughout the 1600s. So Thomas Nevill II becomes a Catholic under James I, and then Henry Nevill I fights in the Civil War as a royalist for the king. So he's loyal to the Pope and to the king, which is quite a sort of, I mean, it's a classic story for the recusants. I think you can argue that they're taken advantage of in many ways. He's taken a prisoner after the Battle of Naseby. Nevill Holt's briefly confiscated by Parliament, and he dies heavily in debt. And then you have his progeny, who are even more Catholic under the later Stuarts, so James and Charles, or Charles and James. And actually, I mean, we think one of them went into exile with James II. So they're kind of active players in the sort of Catholic world of the late 1600s.
And how are we seeing the architecture in the house on the estate sort of change with the changing fashions in that time?
It does change. I mean, it's more muted. They're not making such bold revisions, but they're certainly hinting at the fact that they're aware of the fact that classicism's becoming more fashionable and they need to make the change. Is it like a sort of, kitchen extension? You're not building a whole new house, but you're definitely adding things to show that you're aware. So, I mean, for example, this table block that we're in right now is from the late 1600s, and you've got this amazing fusion of what looks in many ways like a sort of Tudor building with these pointed arches, but then on the outside there's a pediment with a giant shell in it, which is almost rococo, and you've got sort of pilasters flanking it on either side.
And even the arches themselves, we see a strange fusion, don't we, with sort of Tudor arches, but then the sort of cornicing above is more classical, and so
the keystone over there.
The keystone,
it's really interesting. They're hinting at the fact they're aware of the changing fashions, and on the house itself they have the cloisters, what they call the cloisters at the back, which is really a loggia. I mean, it's a sort of Italian idea of you're going to have your lunch underneath it and that kind of thing. And I suppose as time goes on, they keep hinting at this. So, for example, they add a Baroque ceiling in the inner hall, and there's a bit of Adam-style plasterwork in one of the ceilings of one of the rooms.
So there are these sort of nods to contemporary fashions, but again, what's lovely for us looking back is so many country houses were knocked down and repeatedly rebuilt in every style, especially families had a lot of money. I think, for example, the Westminsters, the Grosvenor family, every generation for about 4 successive generations knocked down and rebuilt Eton Hall in successive styles, whereas Nevill Holt, because they were paying these recusancy fines, perhaps partly were unable to knock down and demolish and rebuild completely. Yeah. And so for us, it's lovely looking back because we have all these different periods. And so Robert Adam, as you mentioned, famous neoclassical architect or classical architect, built these extraordinary sort of Whig palaces like Kedleston, amongst others, extraordinary sort of classical designs with huge marble halls and columns and pilasters and everything like that. And they had a little nod to it here, did they not, with an Adam-esque
with a plaster ceiling, yeah. And so it's kind of, I mean, I love how they have both. They've got the Baroque and they've got the neoclassical. I mean, this house is almost like a kind of a tapestry of.
I'm a classicist, and Rory is writing a book on Vanbrugh at the moment, and is very much a Baroque specialist.
I'm a Baroque person, yes. If anyone likes Baroque, they can come and talk to me afterwards, and we can sort of geek out about Vanbrugh and Hawksmoor and all this kind of thing. But it's lovely. So the house kind of keeps all these things as it goes along, because they're not wholesale rebuilding.
But despite Rory not having enough cash to knock down and rebuild, they end up running out of cash completely, did they not?
They do end up running out of money in excellent recusant style. They run out, and this is in the early 19th century. And at this point, the house suddenly has a new lease of life under a new dynasty, who, Jeff, I'm now going to start asking you about. So, could you tell me what happens? What saves Nevill Holt in the 19th century?
I suppose something we glossed over was they had a little bit of cash at the beginning of the 19th century, and started to, the Victorian Gothic style was coming into fashion. Yeah. And luckily for the Nevilles, they didn't have to Gothicise completely, because there was still some actual real Gothic from the 15th century still here, was there not? So suddenly their style of architecture that had been out of fashion for 300 years was suddenly fashionable again, but they still decided, this is how they spent the rest of their money, was it not? They decided to Gothicise it even more.
I just love the idea that if your family's running out of money, it's an obvious decision to Gothicise your entire house again when it's already Gothic. But it's quite cool. They find suddenly that this house is becoming fashionable. It's like they bought a pair of jeans 300 years ago and put them in the cupboard, and they bring them out and they've realised that they've come back in vogue again. Yeah. But they do run out of money, and so the Cunards arrive. Correct.
So they actually try leasing it first. They lease the house and it still doesn't fill the coffers. So in 1876, they sell the house and the estate and enter the Cunard family, Cunard Shipping, the Cunard Line. I'm sure our audience have all heard of it. Rival to the White Star Line, who built Titanic, one of the great shipping lines. And they were really Victorian imperial industrialists. They were from Nova Scotia in Canada. And Samuel Cunard started the shipping line, and he was given a baronetcy from Queen Victoria. and his grandson Edward bought the house and estate in 1876 and sadly died a year later, which meant it passed to his brother with the fantastic name of Bash, Sir Bash Cunard.
He had a huge moustache.
And two brothers called Bish and Bosh.
Yes,
And Bash inherited the baronetcy from his grandfather or from his father before that. But he decided, because they had lots of sort of Victorian Industrial Revolution money. They thought they did. Well, yeah, there's a common theme at Nevill Holt. Let's hope it doesn't. Yeah, let's hope it's not in perpetuity. But so what happened was he decides to aggrandise the house even further.
Yeah.
So he adds bits to the house, but also he renovates the church. This is Bash, and he adds 2 new entrances, including gate lodges. And there's one fantastic gate lodge which you must look out for called the Buffalo Lodge, which is done in a sort of neo-Tudor style. And Bash really loved Nevill Holt because, and this is a common theme throughout Nevill Holt's history, he loved it because of the hunting. So what's lovely, that beautiful view you see over the Welland Valley also looks out towards Rockingham Forest, which was William the Conqueror's hunting ground. And Nevill Holt is very fortunate, and excuse me if the Saunders-Watsons are in the audience, Nevill Holt has its own folly in the form of Rockingham Castle in the distance. So
one wonders if they say the reverse.
Yeah. And Rockingham was a Norman castle, which now has a lovely Elizabethan, I think, house inside. But it
so he likes it because
he likes
of
his
the
hunting. Yeah, great. And that hunting has carried on with all these famous hunts in the area. Nevill Holt had a hunt, and
he also liked it because their family, you know, is not that ancient. If they buy this house, they can kind of acquire. It's a bit like sort of cultural money laundering. You know, you buy the house and therefore you kind of acquire.
Yeah, so it's interesting. We saw this huge emergence, as I'm sure everyone knows, in the late 19th century with imperial money coming in and industrial revolution, sort of entrepreneurs, and it seemed that people would either go one way or the other. They'd either build some enormous Victorian pile like Harlexton Manor or somewhere like that, or they would buy an established country house and sort of by social credibility imply that they had perhaps been here longer. And so the Cunards tapped into that. But
it all goes wrong, doesn't it?
It all goes wrong because despite having this shipping line being the sort of Onassis of their day, they still ran out of money. In the early 1890s. And so Bash decides to do what every sensible English landowner did at the time, and he marries a rich American wife.
Enter Maud.
So Maud Burke is this American heiress, and she marries, later known as Emerald. So we'll get on to her, but Emerald Cunard, famous socialite, rebranded herself a little bit later on. Maud at the time arrives at Nevill Holt, and she has very different interests to her husband. So Bash loves his hunting, shooting and fishing, and Maud loves her sort of arts and culture. And there was no Nevill Holt Festival in those days, so it was quite hard to tap into arts and culture out here.
But how did she make up for it then? There's a good story.
Oh, there's wonderful. So what she used to do when Bash used to go off on fishing trips, she used to invite all her London socialite friends over, and they used to open all the windows and sing Wagnerian arias out of the window.
I learned that apparently Jeff is staying here tonight, and I'm going to be very disappointed if I don't find him hanging out of a window singing Wagner, terrifying all of the poor festival goers.
Absolutely. So yeah, Emerald and Bash, there's this constant tension. He's loving being out here doing his hunting, shooting, fishing. He's spent all this money on making the estate grander, and he's now got more cash from his wife, and so they carry on living a very glamorous lifestyle, but she is going to London a lot for social events, and in the end, she decides to decamp properly to London in 1911. So kind of leaves her husband here. They don't divorce, but they sort of separate. She holds court in London, and Bash, very sadly, well, guess what happens? He runs out of money again. And this time it's for good. So he had already drawn up the sales particulars for the estate in 1893 before he married Maud. And there were 30 lots that were going to be sold off, and they weren't because he got Maud's inheritance. But come 1919, the house is sold off and the estate in only 5 lots because he's been selling piecemeal the remaining lots over the
It's very
preceding
interesting,
20
isn't it?
years.
And I think we think of the late 19th and early 20th century as this kind of halo golden period for country houses, but you've got sort of, it's not. I mean, they're financially kind of really struggling because you've got this great agricultural depression which has been going on in the late 19th century.
And land prices plummet.
Land prices plummet because they start importing goods from abroad. They can do because of the Industrial Revolution. And then in tandem with that, you've got obviously the war, and that means that labour becomes much more expensive. And then you've got the Liberal Party introducing their reforms. And so suddenly, people living in these houses are under an enormous amount of strain.
And if you're not an Industrial Revolutionist, and you've not got coal mines or inventions or whatever it is, then
Wagnerian wives.
Wagnerian wives, exactly.
Feels like struggling.
So the house is sold off and it becomes a prep school, and we'll circle back to that in a minute. It becomes a prep school in 2019, but we need to just finish off with the Cunards, because what happened to them is
their histories. And to tell me, I have to say, I don't particularly like Maud. She sort of slightly annoys me. I don't think she treats. I'm Team Bash.
Well, Maud put a lot of nose out of joint, including the royal families, and we'll talk about that in a second. She was very much persona non grata. So Bash ends up, after selling this place, going off to live in a hunting lodge. I think he leased it from the Cavendishes.
I think so. Yeah.
And dies in 1925. Maud becomes Emerald, rebrands herself Emerald, and lives a very glamorous life in London, and holds court, has multiple affairs with composers and all sorts of people, never remarries, but she makes a big mistake of backing the wrong horse in the form of Wallis Simpson. So she decides she wants to be Wallis Simpson. She's very socially aspirational, and she decides she wants to be Wallis Simpson's mistress of the robes, a lady in waiting, and backs her to the hilt, convinced that Wallis will become queen. And then we get the abdication crisis, and Wallis and Edward are exiled, and Wallis is Emerald is socially exiled because she is despised by the royal family to such an extent that she's not allowed to go to places where the royal family are until after they've left. So I don't know how that worked in Covent Garden, which she was a patron of, because she sort of entered the opera house after the opera was over. I'm never quite sure. But
it's a bit of an own goal, that one, isn't it?
It is. So then what happened was she then moved back to the States for a bit, came back, moved into the Dorchester, and died there in quite a lonely death in the late 1940s. But they had a daughter called Nancy, who you may have heard of. She was born here at Nevill Holt. And Nancy was, I suppose, I don't know if any of you watch, I for a hobby, I quite enjoy going onto the Just Stop Oil Instagram page to sort of tease myself about how silly it is. And there's this girl called Phoebe who definitely lives in Daddy's flat in Notting Hill, but glues herself to the road and tells everyone how awful things are. And and Nancy was sort of that version. She was the real champagne socialist of her day. She was an extraordinary activist. She was anti-fascist, anti-racist campaigner. She was quite a, I suppose.
She was a sort of bright, she was a classic bright
but
young thing.
She was a bright young thing, but far more activist in her approach. But she also did patronise the arts and did some extraordinary things. So she set up a publishing house called the Hours Press, and they really took under their wing relatively unknown authors and writers.
She helped to pioneer early 20th century literature.
So W.H. Auden, George, Ezra Pound,
Samuel Beckett,
amongst others.
It was really, and the production, the books that she was producing were beautiful. I mean, they never made any money, but the point is she was pioneering literature at the time.
Yeah, it's a bit like, for example, maybe a country house owner today taking under his wing two young podcasters and putting them on stage in his opera house. Similar sort of idea. So we see Nancy living this, social activist lifestyle. Meanwhile, Nevill Holt is a prep school all the way through most of the 20th century.
We would have had an absolute ball here.
Rory loves brass rubbing.
I love brass rubbing.
And there's a church right here. So
I would have been rubbing away, having a lovely time.
And anyway, but it declines, and the whole house and estate. I think this theatre that we're sitting in now, which was originally a stable block, was turned into
it was
laboratories.
Enormous number of things.
I think there was a swimming pool, a school swimming pool in here as well.
A boxing ring.
And it was pretty decrepit by the late 20th century. And in the end, the prep school shut down. And in 1999, I think it was, the place was put on the market. And it could have gone in any direction because, as I'm sure everyone knows, the country house as a whole declined severely in the second half of the 20th century. Famously, there was that great turning point, the exhibition at the V&A curated by Roy Strong, on the destruction of the English country house. Thousands of houses were demolished. Nevill Holt survived because it was a prep school, but could have gone anyway. In 1999, it could have been bought by a hotelier, turned into a hotel or a golf course or something. Instead, it was rescued by our host, the businessman, entrepreneur, philanthropist, David Ross, who we are delighted now to welcome to the stage, because we're going to now quiz him on a few things relating to the last 20 years.
Brilliant. Nice to see David.
So, David, thanks for hosting us today. Thank you for hosting everyone here at your lovely home. I hope, as far as you're aware, we haven't got any facts too wrong. Maybe we have. But you'll correct me later, I'm sure.
It's an ominous
The only thing I'd say is when the Nevilles arrived, it wasn't Nevill Holt.
No.
It was Holt.
Yeah, it was Holt.
Became Nevill Holt as a result of their 400 years here. I think broadly, I'd referred to my friend Nick Hill in the audience, who will be running a seminar on this after this live podcast. And I'm sure he will pick up on the points of detail. But in my own case, before my arrival here, although I'd say I'm an enthusiast, I'm not sure I really am necessarily the expert on all of the items of detail, but clearly you've done a lot of research. So well done.
Well, thanks to Pevsner,
Thank you
really.
very well. No, good old Pevsner. He's always reliable at the right time.
So, David, you found this house with, I suppose, the gardens, really, but they weren't here, really. But you found this place in 99 or 2000. What made you buy Nevill Holt? What was it that drew you to the house and the estate? Well, no estate on it at the time.
Well, I grew up in Grimsby, was living in London, had been looking to have a place in the country, somewhere between, I sort of thought somewhere between Grimsby and London, and maybe close to where I was at school or close to where I was at university at Nottingham would be convenient because of my sort of friendship circles. I thought, well, that'd be a good idea. And then I'd been looking sort of not very seriously, and then I saw that this place, which I knew but didn't know well as a result of having been up again. So I decided to come and have a look. And I think it's fair to say that if I had known then what I know now, I probably wouldn't have. I might not have been quite so ambitious, but I looked at it and thought, and what was a really striking moment was when the estate agent actively started lobbying me and telling me, no, this is not something you should get involved with. I thought, hang on, you're trying to sell the place, and if you think that, I mean, I don't think I'm going to have I don't think I'm going to have much competition in this bidding process, and fair enough. I didn't have much competition in the bidding process, but as I subsequently found out, it wasn't the buying of the place that was the challenge. It was the next 25 years that.
What did it look like when you took over?
Well, I would say it looked quite institutionalized. Inside, it still had sort of towels on the floor and dormitories, dormitory-style bedrooms. And as this was an art block, a science block, and a school. It was undoubtedly institutionalized, but therein lied the opportunity in a way. And one of the advantages, there was a disadvantage and an advantage of it having been a school for 80 years. One of the advantages of it having been a school was they had no money, so they hadn't been able to do anything to the fabric of the building. The disadvantage was they had no money, so they hadn't been able to do anything to the. But in a way, there's a sort of reciprocal relationship between the fact that absolutely nothing had happened here, alongside the fact that it was in need of a fundamental sort of redo, and that's what we then set off to do. I think when you say why, other than the sort of prep school car park and the dormitories and the science block and everything else, I think the important thing about this place is when you get here and you enjoy the view and you look at the house, there's a great sense of, wow, this is extraordinary. And I think that must have been the driver at that stage.
You feel very grounded in not just the history of the house. This is what I think Rory and I love about English country houses as a whole, is how they are symbolic of, I suppose, the evolution of this country. And what's lovely, looking even at the facade of Nevill Holt, is you can see so many different periods. You can often tell by the windows, there are mullioned windows, there are stone mullions and all sorts of different aspect, literally the whole higgledy-piggledy facade is the biography, as I said earlier, of domestic architecture over the past 800 years. And so you must feel very grounded in, I suppose, British history as well here.
Well, one of the wonderful things about the property is the fact that over the 800 years or so that it's been here, none of the owners have had the financial resource to knock it down and start again. I think that probably relates to the most recent owner as well, as it happens. But the reality is that lack of being able to knock it down and start again gives you this extraordinary time lapse into fashion and the development of English country houses. And, oh, we need a dining room, we'll put the dining room on the back. Oh, we need more place for the staff, just a sort of a kitchen wing on the back. So it's this extraordinary sort of evolutionary tale as the house has evolved. And that, for me, is the magic of the place, because you walk through all these different styles and all these different places, and you look at the plan of what the house would look for in Cunard, and then you say, how can I possibly make that relevant to 21st century living? But extraordinarily, I think we have made it relevant to 21st century living.
Well, we had a bit of a little peek inside earlier, and I was really amazed, because the outside is, it's pretty traditional, obviously, but the inside feels very light, very airy, pretty modern. I mean, but tastefully done. I mean, talk to us a little bit about the interiors and how you approach doing those.
Well, I mean, the starting point really is that the house is built for show, so it's very, very long and thin. Yeah. In many instances, only one room wide. And that's what really gives you that great sense of light, because you've got light coming in from the front and from the back of the house, almost throughout the house. So it is in that sense a bit of an optical illusion and designed to impress. So what was the second half of the question?
I suppose how did you create such a contemporary feel on the inside?
Well, as it was recently documented, and I had the Mickey taken out of me yesterday, for those of you here, I'd made a sort of decision. I didn't want it to look like my grandmother's house. So my starting point is I not only did I was also required to retain some of these extraordinary and most wonderful features that were in the house. And, in the world of heritage architecture and in the world of English heritage and in the world of the various different groups that defended this house versus the heathen entrepreneur from the mobile phone industry who came up here, what I would say is the great thing about this house, from where it was to where it is now, is just a story of compromise. And with the benefit of hindsight, most of those compromises were entirely right. And I think that is a sort of great reflection on the checks and balances that are put in place when you have the good fortune to be able to take on a place like this. But obviously, my passion is contemporary art, and that is a fundamentally different approach to the way this house looks and feels and decorated to the way that it would have been done by any previous owner. And I think in terms of how do you set the tone of the house, in terms of that feel, some reasonably contemporary but not modern furniture positioned alongside contemporary art on a backdrop of very ancient features, I think just sort of gives you...
Which ties in nicely with the history of the house, the idea of it adapting to the 21st century and fitting different historical periods together. You talk about your contemporary art collection. Obviously, we've had a look at it earlier, but you've also got an extraordinary sculpture collection. Can we talk about the gardens for a minute? Because I know Rory, who wrote his first book was on follies, and Rory gets rather excited about.
Well, I think if you want to talk
outside.
about follies, we're sat in a folly, aren't we?
Yeah, quite.
I mean, this is my 21st century version of a folly, I sometimes think.
We will. Well, yeah. Why don't we start with the Opera House? So let's start with this extraordinary theatre now, I suppose. 'Cause it's a festival. It's not just an opera festival now. Let's talk a bit about what the festival then and this building.
When I bought the house, obviously for the previous 80 years it had been a school, so I was receiving letters from a number of people going, I hope I can still visit my school. Go, well, this is going to be an interesting one. So what I thought was, it's actually not, I look back at my school days, it is not an unreasonable emotional attachment to your school that you want to go back there. So I thought, well, I can't say no, but I can't have people just turning up willy-nilly. So I thought, well, the best way of doing it would be to have a period of time when any old boy or old girl of the school, if they ever wanted to come back, you'd be able to, and I got letters, I say, yeah, fantastic, between so-and-so and so-and-so, there'll be a festival at the house, please, I look forward to meeting you, please come and say hello. And it just diffused all that idea of me having, so that was part of it. The other thing is that a house like this really benefits from having people here. It really benefits from this sort of thing because it just, everybody a little bit ups their game. Everybody's thinking, how can I make this a little bit or this a bit different or better or enhanced? And every aspect of the house, I think, is sort of slightly cajoled by virtue of the festival from being the very best that it possibly can. So I don't think it's whilst some might say, well, isn't it an inconvenience? It's not an inconvenience. It's a great opportunity for the house to present itself every year in the best possible way. So I embrace that. As far as this building was concerned, I mean, clearly in the era of the combustion engine, for somebody who doesn't hunt and actually hasn't ridden a horse for nearly 25 years, and that's a completely different story, this stable block was never going to have a purpose unless it was repurposed. And therefore, with the Opera Festival having started and the Opera Festival, I thought, well, the best possible repurposing is into a public space of this kind, because otherwise, what would you use a building of this scale for? And that was very interesting, because what I was really struck by then was the sort of size of relief almost from English Heritage and other bodies who go, hallelujah, what an amazing solution for this sort of space. And Chris Watson and Stephen Witherford, who are the two, in my opinion, genius architects, who came up with this scheme, there's only 3 small places on which this building actually touches a stable block. And other than that, it's just a complete transformation of the stable block from a decorational standpoint, and then the planting of this extraordinary, and it is literally planted into the stable courtyard, and it only touches 3 on that, sorry, there's 6, 3 on that side and 3 on this side. And other than that, there's no interface between the theatre and the building, and that's really the genius of I think what those two amazing guys achieved.
Out of interest, I mean, were you looking at lots of architects, or did you go straight to them? What was your
No, I went to probably 5 or 6 architects, most of whom were experts in opera houses and theatres. And Stephen Witherford came in. He was the guy who came in to see me, and he'd already won a Sterling Prize, and he had no pitch, and he said, look, I've never done an opera house in my life. I don't really know how to do an opera house, but I love listed buildings, and I love this building, and I will create something for you that is sort of truly sensitive and fits into this space. And he then sort of went on to express and explain how he was going to go about doing it, whereas other people coming in with these very sort of glamorous models that I was not so sure about that one sort of thing. And so the key was his approach to how he wanted to retain the fabric and maintain the fabric of this as a listed building whilst giving it a purpose. And in my opinion, it's an absolutely fantastic intervention, for which we were nominated for a Sterling Prize as well, but sadly lost to a housing association development in Norwich. There's no bitterness in that.
So David, you had this extraordinary building, what I suppose sunken into the stable block. And I love it here because I always find at country house operas, I know this is not just an opera festival now, but at country house operas, I always find the opera house can slightly spoil the view of the house. No names mentioned, and it's lovely here that it doesn't. But tell us, David. So you did this here, but then the gardens were a blank canvas as well, and you filled them with your sculpture collection. Tell us a little bit about the gardens.
Well, the garden really, in the same way as I was very fortunate to meet Chris Watson and Stephen Witherford, I think I was very lucky to meet Rupert Golby and Andy, the head gardener. I would say that whilst on this, I would give myself a reasonable amount of credit for the vision and the idea and the concept, and I'd say on the gardens, I'd have to give a lot more credit to Rupert Golby and to Andy for the vision that they've displayed in the evolution of the garden back to something close to what it would have looked like at some stage in history, but at no defined space in history. So we've taken various different plans of the garden over the years and tried to say, how could it all sort of fit together? Bearing in mind that after 80 years as a school, there was no garden. I mean, there was no effective garden. It had all been sort of used as playing fields and areas for children to run around in. So we've tried to sort of reconstitute it as best we could based on a sort of, not on a plan, but on a vision of how it might have looked. And I think in that regard, Rupert and Andy's vision has been incredibly powerful, and I find it very interesting. Those mobile phones are really pesky, aren't they? And I think as you, what I'm interested by is when people come here, if I think about the theatrical experience, the garden experience, and the food and beverage experience, if we can call it that, I find it very interesting that people don't come here for any single reason. I find a lot of people come here for the holistic experience of spending time in the garden, seeing the sculpture, enjoying a glass, or in many cases, a bottle of wine, and then coming and seeing something in here. And I think it's that holistic experience that really appeals. And I think that's why it's important that nobody can see the theatre until they get into here and things like that.
But I think you're being slightly modest about the garden insofar as these sculptures, which Pepper is, and I think in many ways they form the focal points of it, were collected, chosen by you. I mean, can you tell us a bit about your approach to choosing those? I mean, is it just what takes your fancy?
Well, I mean, it's consistent with the rest of my collecting hypothesis around art, which is to collect what I consider to be wonderful things created during my lifetime by British artists. So I have, 100% of the pictures in the collection and 100% of the sculptures in the collection are created by British artists, and between 90 and 95% of them are things that have been created within my lifetime. So since, I'm not going to give that bit away, but in my lifetime. And I've been lucky in the process to meet some wonderful artists. So Alan Jones has become a particular friend, which is why he's got quite strong representation in the garden. Mark Quinn has become a good friend. I'm afraid his piece is off being repolished at the moment. Nick Fidian Green became a very dear friend and has done some wonderful interventions, but particularly the Horse at Water, that I think is probably probably the Horse at Water on the front, and Alan Jones's dancers in front of the cedar tree on the back are probably the two of the defining. But Nick Fidian Green wanted to do a sculpture to put in front of the stable block, and talked to me very animatedly about it, and then contracted leukemia and went sort of quiet on me for a couple of years, and I had no idea why he'd gone quiet. He wasn't sharing or being public about his illness, at least not to beyond a certain level of his friendship circle. And then he turned up when he went to a retreat at Uppingham. He turned up, he said, "I've now got the perfect piece for the front of your lawn, and I'm going to drop it off next week. And if at the end of the summer you like it, then you should buy it, and if you don't, I'll take it away." But I think it's the perfect place for this particular piece, and I think he was completely right in his judgment there.
Sorry, just one final question on that. David, do you have before we might talk about the estate a bit, do you have a favourite part of the House of Garden? Is there a particular place that you're just thrilled with and pops for you?
A favourite place of the House of Garden? That's quite difficult, because that's like having a favourite child. That's not possible, is it, Carl? There we go. I think it's quite difficult to get. The thing is, I think the thing about this house and garden is you have to, it's holistic for me. The whole thing has to work together. And I think that if you micromanage down to there are places clearly where we all enjoy sitting, and if you want to have a barbecue lunch, then the Font House garden and the kitchen garden are great for a barbecue lunch, but equally if you want to sit out and enjoy the view. So I think in a way it's horses for courses, but I try to shy away from having a favourite place or spot. I find the whole thing works as a collective, and that's what I try to help it do.
Sure. And David, when you bought Nevill Holt, because what I love as well is this is the story not just of the revival of the house, the grounds, but also the piecing back together of what had previously been broken up in terms of the broader estate. And I love the fact that when you bought it, I suppose, 25 years ago, there was not much land, and over time you've brought in hand farmland, and and you've got a shoot now and various other things. And so you've pieced back together. Have you tried to do that in accordance with the original estate boundaries, or just what's become available? Or?
No, I mean, I would say that with an element of good fortune, I have been able to put together most of the original boundary, not all, but most of them over time, and extended a little bit further because the church, who had owned quite a significant block of land between here and the Ibrook, put on sale a piece of land that had never changed hands since the Norman conquest. So, but that is good fortune, as one neighbour has decided to go and live in Canada, and another neighbour has decided that it was time to move on from farming, and I've managed to piece together a substantial block of land around the house now, which is, I mean, which obviously makes the whole thing more coherent, and just sort of the great thing about land in that sense is clearly there's a farming element, but for me, there's a huge amenity that comes from being able to enjoy a view, share a view, or walk to a view, particularly walking and this sort of thing, which is something that, so being able to hike around the park and take in trees that have recently been planted, this is, that is in the DNA of what I think is extraordinary about being able to put the place back together in that sense.
It's lovely, David. It gives me hope. I mean, when I worked at Country Life magazine, I worked there for 3 years, and it always used to break my heart when I saw family homes being sold in lots. I totally lost perspective, by the way, working at Country Life, because I became a total snob about country houses when I lived in a tiny flat in Battersea. I'd sort of, if it didn't have a shoot or a, I don't know, an orangery, I wasn't interested.
We don't have an orangery.
You don't have an orangery.
Right, we're off.
Oh, yeah, I'm off. No, it was. It always breaks my heart when I see them family homes split into lots, and it's lovely that they can be reassembled, I suppose, over time.
Indeed.
I think final question on the estate, and how have you diversified it? Have you done much to, I suppose, a lot of estates are rewilding and all this kind of thing. Are you getting involved in that trend, or are you running a million miles from it?
Not so much. No, not so much.
More of a recusant Catholic approach.
Good choice. This is. Yeah.
Look, rewilding, that's a completely different debate. We're using, I understand the whole rewilding debate, but food security equally is an important debate, and we're in the business of productive farming. Okay. So, but I mean, I'm ambivalent about my rewilding friends. I'm neither pro nor anti. I just, for the bits of the land that are not being involved in, in productive farming, I like to plant trees and to use it as an opportunity to get amenity value through walking and shooting and things like that.
Sure. In terms of, David, before we move on to some questions from the audience, where do you see, I mean, you've done an extraordinary amount already. Do you have plans to do anything more here? Grow the festival, or do any further building works or anything? What are your plans? And where do you fit within the history of Nevill Holt? Where do you see, because I know there's a little surprise behind you, which we'll see in a minute, but I know it's very much, you've not tried to make it into a museum of what it once was, but you feel very much a part of the overall story of Nevill Holt. Where do you see that story going, and how do you tap into the past?
Yeah, so in terms of where that story might go, I mean, I'm conscious at the moment that I'm just a minor blip on the, thank you. I guess I'm a minor blip on the history of Nevill Holt, and it'll be up to my heirs to make their own decisions. You can't rule from beyond the grave in any way at all. Therefore, it will undoubtedly be up to my heirs to decide what their own personal contribution would or wouldn't be to the ongoing story of the Ross family at Nevill Holt. I guess I'd summarise that by saying, for the moment, I think we're all incredibly lucky to be here. In terms of the festival, look, I think I say the same thing many, many times. This festival will thrive or die based on the support of local people. We can get as many people as we like to come from London or wherever else, but the reality is that this is a community-led. It's a community-led festival designed to bring insight, debate, music, and other things into this community in order that the community can enjoy it. And therefore the festival, the scope of the ambition for the festival is in a way governed by the scope of the ambition of the community that it serves, is what I would say on that. Clearly from my point of view, I would love this to continue in the way that it is doing. The feedback that I get is incredibly positive. I hope you're all enjoying your days here. I hope you feel tempted to come back. That's all I can say.
I think.
We'll do the Fox. Yeah, well, I'll do the Fox. David, I find it interesting. You say you tend to. Well, I love the fact that you haven't tried to fill the painting with portraits of Neville's and all the rest of it, and that it's very much. The house with portraits of Neville's, and that you very much buy work done in your lifetime. But what's behind you is a purchase that isn't from your lifetime, but does link to the house. Can you tell us a bit about that?
This is an interesting one, and I've kept down the wraps because I would really like no photos to be taken of this, please. That's all right. So what I think is very interesting is the piecing together of the history of the house. And whilst the Nevilles were a significant contributor, clearly, given the length of their tenure here, I do find that the contribution of the Cunards quite extraordinary. And not only because of the interventions that they made into the fabric of the building. I mean, my belief, and Nick Hill can confirm this, that this back of the stable block was built by Cunard as well, but we'll have to get a fact check on that later. But Cunard also made some extraordinary contributions in terms of his metalwork. He was a metalworking and silversmithing enthusiast. When he wasn't fishing and hunting, he had a studio up one of the towers where he would work. And so I'm very struck, and I'm also fascinated by this whole Maud, Emerald and Nancy and their contribution, not only to the architectural history of Nevill Holt, but to the social history. And the social history of a house is quite interesting, is as interesting in a way as the architectural history, because the whole thing, what you see when you wander around and talk to people about it is that there's an interaction inevitably between the social history and the physical history of the building, because actually, why do people build things? Because they need them. And why do they need them? Maybe other than instant social recognition, which is what Jeff suggested was the reason why I bought this house, I think. Other than the instant social recognition, people build because they have a purpose or they need. Anyway, I was struck by that, and I'm struck by Cunard's presence as a huntsman, as a horseman, and the contribution and his attachment to the local countryside through his hunt. And therefore, what I found here was something that had been gifted to Bash Cunard in 1888 by the hunt members of Nevill Holt when he was living here, and it was given to him by the members of the hunt as a thank you for the work he had been doing on behalf of the hunt. And do you want to unveil it?
Yeah, sure.
And I think it's a pretty extraordinary thing, but I'd be very grateful because there's a security risk attached to this particular thing. I'm asking for no. So that was given. There we go.
Yeah. We before we do Q&A, you must say, when David said, "Can I show you my silver fox?" earlier.
No, I said, "Can I show you my fox?"
My fox. Well, I thought he wanted to show me some sort of stole. And
no, you didn't. You thought it was a stole.
Stuffed. Well,
anyway,
we're very
so that was gifted to Cunard in 1888, and it's a pretty extraordinary thing. I'm very happy it's back in the house.
So can we leave it uncovered for the Q&A, David?
Yeah, you can, but please no photos, because I don't want people to know it's here.
Great.
I had a break-in previously, and I don't need another.
David, are you happy to join us for the Q&A?
I'm very happy to take a question or two if anybody's...
We've got, I think, about 10 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes. Do we have any questions? We've got raving mics. Down here at the front.
Hello. It's been delightful to come here today and see how you have brought the personality of this beautiful home back to life in a way that it has obviously been living for generations through different families. And I was wondering if you had any advice for any potential budding country house owners who might be the next generation
Well,
Is it essential of how to do that when they might potentially not have a carpet warehouse empire behind them? Or would you encourage them to go create their own cargo warehouse? And how essential is it to have cash?
well, I think the country is full of amazing and extraordinary architecture of different scales. So if I look at Ivor Bracker and the work that he's done in Norfolk, restoring a hunting lodge there, it's a project of a very different scale to this project, but he has done it with love, and he's done it with attention to detail, and he's rebuilt a parkland, and it is extraordinary. And therefore what I would say is, I wouldn't worry, and I think there's other stories of people that have done, in many different places, there are gems of architectural history, important architectural history, that need to be rescued and need to be loved. So what I would say is find the property that suits your budget in that respect. But at the same time, you should, I think, treat the building. You need to show it that love and attention to really make it work. No problem.
Anyone else?
Oh,
Over
dear.
there.
This is going to be
Over
very
there.
difficult.
Oh,
When you first bought the house, were you ever tempted to follow in Bash Cunard's footsteps and take up hunting and horses?
Okay, so this is a stitch-up question, and I will answer it. I will answer it honestly. When I first came to Leicestershire, I saw all my neighbours getting on horses, and I thought, and by the stage I was at this stage in my late 30s, and maybe not quite as athletic as I could have been in my youth. I thought it would be important for me to try and learn the practices of horse riding. It's fair to say that didn't last very long, and I wouldn't say it was one of the most successful sporting adventures of my life, and therefore I gracefully decided after a period of time maybe to pull back from his inspiration and his example, for which, for my equestrian mad friends across the county, I apologise. I tried and it didn't work. And thank you for the question. Hello.
Your forebears at this house, do you feel most affinity for, or respect most, or family?
Yeah, I think it might be. I think it might be because of proximity, and it may be because they were a maritime-based family, and mine was a maritime-based family in terms of my own father and grandfather's business. But I think really the Cunards. I mean, they were one generation before my own family, doing ocean liners at the time then that my grandfather and father were sending fishing trawlers into the North Sea and to Norway and to Iceland. I see, if you look at their family crest with the waves, and there's a definite link somewhere between the history of the Cunard family and my family in terms of that emotional attachment. And so and I think they're more current, they're more relevant, they're sort of industrial. They're clearly not industrialists in the sense but they are a product of an industrial age as opposed to that historical age. So it's more a history that I can understand. And I think Cunard, his brother bought it and died, and then he constructed this extraordinary window. If you get the chance to go and have a look in the chapel, this extraordinary stained glass window in the chapel, which is so beautiful in honour of his brother. And then he went on and he saw the oriel window that was in the Great Hall. He said, well, I want one like that. So he built an oriel window to mirror it on this side of the house. Even though he didn't knock down and start again, and I'm very grateful for the fact he didn't, he was an ambitious, Victorian builder in that sense. And personally, I'm not sure that I like his style quite so much as I like the earlier style of the oriel window and the porch. But I still sort of congratulate him for having got stuck in and done this to the stable block and done these other things to the house. And he was quite a guy. And his wife and his daughter were also in their own right amazing people. So and the social history of the house is so much of the social history of the house is driven by them. And I think and that part of it I'm very interested by, and I see a connection to, as is evidenced potentially by what we're all doing this evening. So I think I have most resonance with them.
Thank you, David. Any more questions? I think we've got time for 2 more.
Nick Hill's got his hand up. This is dangerous. Come on then. Here's the detail, man.
It's not on academic. It's really just, I think the answer is probably sort of self-evident, but back in the days, we used to be able to do tours inside the house and so on, and I wondered if there's ever going to be the opportunity to do that, or whether the problems it raises are too difficult.
So there is an art tour available, and if you go online, you can book the art tour, and effectively the art tour gives you the opportunity to have a little look around the house as well, but it's a guided tour, limited in terms of numbers, which it has to be just because of the sheer weight of traffic otherwise. So there is a tour, and it's available on the website, and somebody who's closer to that website than me might be able to tell me exactly. But anyway, if you go to the box office, I'm pretty sure you would still be able to buy the art tour. But the house tour is effectively sort of doubles up as an art tour. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.
Yeah, but the issue about that is we can't have 100 people at a time. So we just have to we just have to do it. But whilst it's not a public space, people are very welcome.
Thanks, David. I think there's a question at the back there. Yes.
Thank you for a beautiful and fascinating and funny conversation. Jeff and Rory, where are you heading next with the Country House podcast? And apart from this beautiful festival here, where can we come see you next, and where can we listen to you?
Well, that's a good question. We slightly, because the podcast's still slightly a passion project. It's grown faster and bigger than we expected, and we both have day jobs. I've got a day job, and Rory is writing his book on Vanbrugh, which is pretty much a day job as well. So at the moment, we kind of fly by the seat of our pants somewhat and sort of plan week by week, which is not very efficient. We've done some really fun episodes in the last few weeks. We did, this last week, we did a really cool episode on Elvedon Hall in Suffolk. And we had Sam Dalrymple, whose father William was speaking earlier today, who's also a historian of India, and he was speaking about the extraordinary work that the Maharaja of Punjab did at Elvedon in the Mughal style. And before that, we did Beaulieu Palace House in Hampshire with Lord Montague, the current Lord Montague. We sometimes get guests on, we sometimes don't. It's a slightly mixed bag. It's always the two of us. Ben, our producer, sometimes joins us as well, which is, I think, listeners like, because it creates familiarity in terms of Rory and my rapport.
I suppose our view is that, with podcasts about country houses, it can so often descend into, interviewing dowagers, and I suppose we're kind of dowagers enough in our own right, really. So you don't need to get them when they're lovely. But we sort of see them as receptacles for history, and a very tangible receptacle for history, and in a way easier to follow perhaps on some mighty tome.
We're also conscious that our audience is quite varied, and that whilst, yes, we have a lot of people who are, I suppose, curious or intellectually curious in architectural history, we also have quite a lot of country house owners who listen to us. So sometimes we do more themed episodes relating to things like setting up an estate vineyard, or we also do themed episodes like almshouses or estate villages.
We recently gathered we're very popular in Korea, which is hugely exciting.
Our biggest following is still in America, though, which we want to tap into a bit more. I think we've got some guests in the room today, potentially, who have invited us to do an interview potentially at nearby Boughton House in Northamptonshire, which is really one of the grandest houses in England. It's sort of the Versailles of England, really. Extraordinary gardens. That's the Dukes of Buccleuch. So
certainly actually the second grandest house.
sorry, David.
But you can.
I see Charlie in the back now.
You can please do, if you want to listen to more of this top quality conversation. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on YouTube. Our recordings are filmed, so you can see us twiddling our thumbs. And
we're also looking for sponsors and advertisers. If you've got something
that is.
I guess. Yeah,
I now declare this. We can now declare this meeting over.
We're over.
When the podcasters are looking for the advertising. Right, thank you.
David, thanks for having us. It's been lovely
pleasure.
for you all to join us. Thank you. Please catch us afterwards, and thank you.
Thank you.
Great.